of the second keynote speaker of the 2018 summit, Professor Suzanne Fitzpatrick. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for making the time. Suzanne is Professor of Housing and Social Policy at Heriot-Watt University at the Institute for Social Policy, Housing, Environment and Real Estate, or iSphere for short, and I think it's at the bottom of our slide there. Suzanne's PhD was on youth homelessness, and over the years she's held a number of different positions at various different universities, and has also been involved with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and has been with Heriot-Watt since 2010, and specialises in research on homelessness and housing exclusion, and particularly with international comparison as well, which will be interesting for us. And the title, Can Homelessness Happen to Anyone? Don't Believe the Hype, I think you'll all find it quite intriguing. It's something that we hear or have heard a lot over the years, and I think there might be some interest in the room about what you're going to cover. So thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to the colleagues here, because unfortunately I was actually meant to speak at this conference, I think in 2014, and unfortunately I wasn't able to make it, so I'm very pleased that you forgave me and asked me again. It's really nice to be here. I suppose it is a deliberately provocative title. It's indicative of some work that myself and a colleague, Glenn Bramley, have done, and have published in an academic paper in a journal called Housing Studies. But where it's kind of generated most interest really is work that we've done in sort of promoting some of the arguments in it about who is at greatest risk of homelessness. Some work we've done to promote those arguments kind of more broadly in the mainstream and social media. I am going to try to speak slowly because I have a Glasgow accent, as you'll already have worked out, but do just wave or gesticulate in some way politely if I'm going too fast, because there's a very good chance as I get into my stride I will start to go too fast. I'm talking about the UK, although I do work which is international comparative. The particular research I'm talking about today is UK based, but I would be very interested to hear people's impressions from other countries about whether you think the work that we've done on the social risks of homelessness, the distribution of homelessness, would be similar or different in your own country and context. So I want to start off with some quotations from British politicians. These quotes are all taken directly from a parliamentary debate in 2016. We've just got new legislation in England on homelessness called the Homelessness Reduction Act, and these quotations are from the debates that preceded the passing of that legislation. And they're actually quotes deliberately from people from different political parties. So the point is, this argument, this position on homelessness is one that crosses party and ideological lines. So we hear this kind of thing quite a lot. Homelessness can happen to anyone or almost anyone. Homelessness results from many different causes. Homelessness is hugely complex. Cumulatively, in combination, these sorts of statements we read, myself and Glenn Bramley, who I did this work with, we read as implying that homelessness is a fairly random event. It can happen to any of us. Who knows who it will happen to next? It's unpredictable. We don't know for sure, or we can't even sort of make a good or an educated guess on who's likely to be affected by homelessness. And it's a bit unfathomable. It's so complex. It's very difficult to understand and get a grip on. That makes it very difficult to predict it. It makes it very difficult to prevent it. What it also does, and I think this is what interested us in this whole agenda, is it sort of depoliticises it. It makes it less ideological. It's something that can happen to any of us. It's random across society, and it's difficult to understand. So you can't link it with any particular policies or structures in society. That seems to be the implication. And to be fair, a lot of the people who make these sorts of statements, these are from politicians, but a lot of the charities, certainly in the UK, homelessness charities, some of them, will make similar kinds of statements. We're all 2 paychecks away from homelessness, we're all 3 paychecks away from homelessness, or 1 paycheck away from homelessness, depending on which particular article you And there's clearly an agenda there, which is, at least in part, about trying to get the public to connect with the issue, to understand the issue, to care about the issue. But our interpretation is it also has this effect of making it less political, less ideological, which is why politicians from all stripes, from really very conservatives all the way across to people who are much further to the left, can sign up to it. So I think partly people say it because it's something we can all agree on before we go on to look at anything else to do with homelessness. We can all agree that it can happen to any of us and it's very complex. Contrast that with this quotation from my colleague Glenn Bramley, which is from some analysis he's done for the charity Crisis. Crisis is one of the large homelessness charities in the UK, as I'm sure most people are aware. Glenn did some work on projections, projecting trends in homelessness going forward for Crisis, and it's quantitative statistical modelling work that he did, looking at the associations between trends in homelessness and other things going on in society. And what he found is that the most important driver of homelessness in all its forms is poverty. Certainly there are other drivers, which includes the affordability and availability of accommodation, the extent to which prevention measures are used, and there has been a big agenda in the UK recently, particularly in England, around prevention measures, and the demographics of people experiencing homelessness. In the UK, homelessness is mainly experienced by younger people. That does differ in different countries, but in the UK, homelessness is overwhelmingly experienced by people under 35, certainly people under retirement age. So how many younger people you have in society and certain other demographic features matter as well. But what Glenn's analysis is saying is that actually we can work out what the underlying drivers are and what the trends are. It's not so random, it's not so unfathomable. And what I want to do today is hopefully convince you that the evidence, certainly in the UK, would support the position that Glenn takes in this quotation. Going back a little bit to the kind of wider debates, and again this is coming from a UK perspective, but many of the similar points have been made in debates, certainly elsewhere in Europe. And traditionally there have been two camps on the causes of homelessness. One which is described sometimes as socioeconomic explanations, which locates the causes of homelessness in the sort of broader structures and characteristics of society, so unemployment, shortage of housing, and so on. And then another camp which attributes it much more to individual causes, to issues that people have in their personal lives, in their family lives, so substance misuse, offending, mental health issues, and other issues. Sometimes that individual causes conceptualisation can also have blame attached to it. Well, people bring about their own homelessness through their own actions, but not necessarily. Some people who take that individual causes type approach are sympathetic to homeless people, but still think it's really something of their personal circumstances. There has been a lot of debate, certainly in the academic world, over the last sort of 20 years that says it's kind of a bit of both. The housing market and kind of economic factors and trends do shape risks of homelessness, but the people who are most likely to be affected are those who have these personal kind of support needs as well. So it's kind of not completely one or the other, tends to be the current position. And everyone can kind of agree on that. But again, Glenn and I weren't content with that position. We feel that's really the start of the debate rather than the end of the debate. To say it's kind of a bit of everything isn't really good enough in terms of planning policy, in terms of planning investment and prevention in particular. And we took the view that it was possible to do better, it was possible to be clearer on what the causes of homelessness were and what the relative strength and importance of these different factors were. So it's not good enough to say, well, some of it's structural and some of it's individual. What exactly is the balance between the structural and individual causes? Which particular structural causes are most important? Which particular individual causes are most important? And what is their interrelationship? What comes first? What's the direction of causation? We thought that it was really important to kind of get beneath these mantras, these statements which can be a bit kind of bland and don't really necessarily get you anywhere in terms of planning policy and so on. So we asked ourselves a series of questions. Again, this is all based in the UK, but I know these questions are of interest to colleagues elsewhere as well. We asked ourselves, who is most at risk of homelessness? First question is the experience of homelessness really randomly distributed across the population, or is it actually concentrated among certain groups? That's the first most basic question. Who is actually affected by it? The second one is, what is the role played by individual social support and structural factors in accounting for the patterns found? What is this balance between the individual and structural? And what we mean by social support is those things that are somewhere in between. So maybe the family and community features that are in the background of people who experience homelessness. And with regard to the structural factors in particular, what is the relative contribution, what's the relative balance between housing market, labour market and poverty-related factors? So it's fair to say that's quite an ambitious agenda. I mean, a lot of academics who we talked to when we were first starting to do this work thought it was a bit perhaps over-ambitious in terms of these are really quite big fundamental questions that relate to the kind of really some very broad and general features of society. But we went on boldly nonetheless because we were very interested to see what we could find out. And actually, this is, I think, peculiar to the UK, although I'm very happy to be contradicted on that. But I do think in the UK we have a uniquely rich set of data sources that enable us to explore those questions. Specifically, we have 3 large-scale surveys which ask people about their experiences of homelessness. These are large-scale national surveys that allow us to draw representative samples, they're based on representative samples, and so to draw robust conclusions about the overall distribution and risks of homelessness. The first one, very fitting, it's a Scottish survey, and it happens a lot actually on homelessness in the UK that the data in Scotland is the best data. Well, this is another one of those cases where, for various reasons, the Scottish data is often better on homelessness, and the Scottish Household Survey provides, in many ways, the best single source of data we have in the UK on people's experiences of homelessness. I won't go into the details of the Scottish Household Survey, but it is a large-scale national survey. We could combine several years of data in this analysis, which basically means we had an extremely large sample, 28,000 people we had as a sample that we could investigate whether based on those questions that are up there, have you ever been homeless? And the definition was lost your home with no alternative accommodation to go to, and has this happened to you in the last 2 years? So have you ever been homeless on a lifetime basis? Have you been homeless in the last 2 years? And also we ask about specific forms of homelessness. Have you slept rough? Have you stayed with friends and relatives, sofa surfed, doubled up? Have you been in various forms of emergency accommodation and so on? So we've got really robust data from Scotland. But what we also have is UK-wide data, and the UK Poverty and Social Exclusion Survey that asks very similar questions, and deliberately so, I have to say. We played a role in trying to, in both shaping the Scottish Household Survey questions and then arguing for them to be included in the UK Poverty and Social Exclusion Survey. The upside of that data source is it's UK-wide. The downside is the sample size isn't quite as big, but it is big enough. Well, it's actually quite a lot smaller, but it is still big enough to do some very interesting analysis. But the real game changer on this, and I think where the UK really is unique, is in the British cohort study, which is a uniquely rich longitudinal data source that's available in the UK. It started off actually in 1958, and the basic idea behind the British cohort study is you take all of the children born in a certain week. So there's a 1958 cohort, that was every single child born in the UK in 1958, and then you follow them through their whole lives, and you ask all sorts of questions of them at various points in their lives, and it means you get this hugely rich data set about people's entire life courses, and you can use that to investigate all sorts of social issues, including homelessness. There was also another cohort selected in 1970, and there's more recent ones as well, but it's the 1970 cohort that was asked lots of interesting questions about homelessness experiences up to age 30. And that's what we've used also in this analysis. And this was the real game changer, because what it allows us to see is what order things happen to people in. So you can't say, as we can with the other studies, well, they're homeless now and they were poor, but how do you know whether poverty and homelessness came first? We can work that out from the British cohort study, because it's asking people questions all the way through. So we've linked data on their childhood experiences around age 10, including on poverty, on their teenage experiences around age 16, so particularly things like offending behaviour, experiences at school, family relationships and so on. And then also in young adulthood, which was about things like their own, having children, forming partnerships, their engagement in higher further education in the labour market and so on. So I don't want to, I'm very happy to answer questions about the data set, but I just wanted to give you a sense that this is based on really robust, large-scale evidence from a number of sources, which each of those sources has its own limitations. In combination, they give us a very full picture of how things are here in the UK. And what that analysis shows us very, very clearly is that the structural inequality drives risk. And I have to pause just because it came into my head just now. There was a rough sleeping strategy published in England last week, I think it was, some of you might have seen. And Glenn and I were both really pleased that even the Conservative government is now referencing this paper as saying, actually, there is quite a lot of evidence of structural drivers of homelessness. So in that sense, if no other, we feel we might have just managed to push the argument in the right direction. What it shows is that structural inequality drives risks, certainly by age 30. And bear in mind that most people in the UK who are homeless certainly become homeless before age 30. The overwhelming, the most important message of our analysis was that childhood poverty had by far the most important influence on your chances of becoming homeless as a young adult. Now, for those of you who are a bit more statistical, the way of summarising that was 52% of all of the risk that was accounted for statistically accounted for by childhood poverty. So in other words, it explained almost half of the variance in the risks of homelessness across young adults. So childhood poverty is overwhelmingly the most important predictor of homelessness. But geography also mattered. Certainly in the UK, homelessness is less likely in rural areas. It's much more concentrated in urban areas, which we kind of knew already, but it really reinforces that message. That's the sort of thing that might well be different in other countries, but here in the UK it's very concentrated in urban areas, and that's not just in absolute numbers, that's proportionally as well. It's less likely in areas of lower housing market pressures. The housing market is a very important driver of homelessness in the UK. The circumstances that make it most likely that you will experience homelessness in the UK is being a poor person living in a rich housing market area. You're the sort of person who's clinging to the edges of the housing market, and you're very likely, or you're much more likely than somebody else to experience homelessness. So in places like London in the south of England, where there is very great pressures in the housing market, if you're somebody brought up in circumstances of poverty who lives in one of those places, you're much more likely to become homeless than other people. Early adulthood experiences, adverse experiences as a teenager do also have an impact. Being excluded from school, serious drug misuse, being in care as a child, lots of other issues to do with school as well, truancy and so on, are important predictors of homelessness in early adulthood. And I should explain, this is all other things being equal. So when you account for all of the other drivers, when you hold everything else equal, all of these factors have an independent effect on your chances of becoming homeless as a young adult. And also early adulthood experiences matter. So if you leave education early, if you experience unemployment, if you're a renter rather than a homeowner, if you've experienced illness or disability, and also your social relationships also have an impact on your chances of becoming homeless as a young adult. So there is definitely some merit in the arguments that family relationships provide an important buffer to homelessness. Young people who are still living with their parents at age 26 in the UK are much less likely to have experienced homelessness. Lone parents living on their own are much more likely to experience homelessness. Young people living in a couple less likely. So in other words, if you're still living with your family or you've formed a partnership but don't have your own children, then that provides protection from homelessness. But being a lone parent or a single person, you're more likely to experience homelessness. So the overall message here is poverty, particularly poverty you've experienced as a child, is by far the most important driver of the risks of homelessness in the UK. Other factors matter. Where you live in the country matters. Whether you can draw on family support matters. Whether you've had a troubled teenage years, these all matter, but none of them matter as much as having experienced, or nowhere near as much as having experienced poverty as a child. So it's one thing to say that the risks are unequal. It's another thing to tell you just how unequal we're talking. This slide shows you two vignettes. These are hypothetical people that we've generated using the data available to us to gauge what their predicted risk of homelessness would be before age 30, based on the analysis that we've done. And I should say that they are illustrative vignettes, they're illustrative stories, and they are drawn from either end of the kind of extremes of the spectrum to make the point. But they do serve to demonstrate just how heavily the odds are stacked against some people. They're very likely to become homeless, and how very, very slim the chances are that other people will become homeless. So the risks are fundamentally different for different people, and they're fundamentally different in ways which are predictable, which are understandable, which are fathomable. So the first vignette, if you're a white male from a relatively affluent childhood in a rural area in the south of England, you graduated from university, you're living with your parents age 26, which is very common now, you don't have a partner, you don't have children. Your predicted probability of experiencing homelessness by age 30 is 0.6%. It's very, very unlikely that you'll experience homelessness by age 30. Compare that with vignette 2. You're a mixed ethnicity female who's experienced homelessness as a child. You were brought up by a lone parent. You're now a lone parent yourself. You have children yourself. You left school or college at 16, have experienced unemployment, and you're living as a renter with your child but with no partner. Your chances of experiencing homelessness by age 30 are 71%. So we're not talking about a slight difference in the chances here, we're talking about fundamental differences. And across all of the data sets we examined, there are groups of people for whom the chances of homelessness are so heavily, or upon whom the chances of homelessness are so heavily concentrated that it more or less constitutes a norm. It's very difficult for them to get through the early years, those transitions from childhood to adulthood, unscathed by homelessness. So you have very, very distinctive risks there. I'm happy to circulate the slides, so don't worry if you want to catch them later. I'll send them on to Zoe, who can circulate them if people are interested. There's also open access. I will say at the end that the paper that this is based on is an open access paper. It's in the Journal of Housing Studies, but anyone can just click on the link and download it. And although it's quite a technical paper, kind of in the middle, but the beginning of the paper and the end of the paper really summarise the story that I'm telling today. I'm switching on actually to a different piece of research just now, just to give a bit of balance, if you like, to what I've been saying. And the astute among you will notice that this is a map of England, so it's not the whole of the UK, and it's certainly not Scotland. Because it's based on some research that we've done in England so far, although we're now doing a similar study in Scotland at the moment. This study we did for the Lankelly Chase Foundation, and what we were looking to do in this study was to look at how homelessness combines with other forms of extreme disadvantage. So where people aren't just homeless, but they're also experiencing other issues like substance misuse and offending, and engagement in the criminal justice system. So that very extreme end of the kind of homelessness and complex needs end of the spectrum. And very often the same people also experience mental health issues. They have issues of trauma in childhood and so on as well. So it's that extreme end of the spectrum. And we mapped out where people experiencing those forms of homelessness were in England. So we're now doing the same for Scotland, but we don't have that. That project's not finished yet. But for England, the geography of homelessness combined with complex needs was very, very clear. It was effectively a map of post-industrial England. It's those parts of England which have suffered most from deindustrialisation. So a lot of the northern cities, but also some coastal towns that have suffered from long-term economic decline. In the UK, as some of you may know, we have a statutory homelessness system where if people are homeless, they can apply to the council to be rehoused. In England, that covers only really families with children. In Scotland, it's all homeless people. But the point is that statutory homelessness system, if I was to put a map up of the statutory homelessness system, that would look very different from this map. People who are accepted as statutory homeless in England are much more likely to live in the richer parts of England because they're those poor people struggling in tight housing market areas, as I said a few moments ago. So those are often families with children who don't necessarily have any complex needs. They simply are too poor to compete in the housing market. So that map looks quite different. That's concentrated in London and the south, whereas if you look at people with the most complex needs, then they tend to be in those areas of long-term economic decline. But what unites both maps is everywhere you look is the poorest people who are experience homelessness. So to conclude, we have been quite robust, both in terms of the academic outputs from this study, but also in terms of some of the media work we've done on it. I did a piece in The Guardian, which some people might have seen, and in social media, is we have went out there really and tried to argue the case that when politicians or indeed charities argue we're all 3 paychecks away from homelessness, it's just not true. What's true, certainly in the UK, is that the chances of homelessness are very, very heavily concentrated on certain parts of the population. The odds are systematically stacked for and against different people. And crucially, ideologically and politically, the reasons are largely outside the control of those people. You can hardly blame somebody for having been brought up in child poverty, and that's the number one driver of homelessness as a young adulthood, in young adulthood. And the key thing that follows on from that is that homelessness actually is predictable. We can do something about this. We can use this data and this evidence to try and predict and therefore prevent it. Because it's predictable, but it's not inevitable. We have to be very clear that these are two different things. To say that the risks are much higher for some people than for others is not at all to say, well, it's inevitable that they'll become homeless. No, it's not. Lots of things can intervene, including good public policy, to stop people becoming homeless. So we can use this knowledge to target prevention and also to challenge structural inequalities. Going back to those political statements that I put up at the beginning, homelessness can't be anyone, and it's so complex, many different causes. Actually, we can use this data to challenge that kind of depoliticising of homelessness. It's very political, it's very structural, and it's driven by policy choices. And we can make different policy choices, and if we do, then we'll have less homelessness. So it's not so complex, it's not so unfathomable. The key thing that we should do is do something about child poverty. If I've got just a couple of minutes, I'll just maybe reflect on some of the reactions to the paper, just this really to amuse me and Glenn more than anything. Because, we're academics, we're used to everyone ignoring us, we're not used to getting a lot of attention for papers, certainly for academic papers, and certainly for papers like this that are fairly technical in their content and statistical. But we got an extraordinary reaction to this paper. We were having retaliatory blogs put out by certain charities. We had a Twitter storm. I mean, Glenn said it was starting a sort of pub brawl. There were people fighting all over the Twitter sphere about our paper that we hadn't even met any of the protagonists, So it became this huge kind of, for us at least, the sort of eye of the storm for a little while, and we were genuinely a bit puzzled. I mean, how can a paper that says there's a strong link between homelessness and poverty be this controversial? It just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem that controversial. But one of the things that was really interesting was that under the line, when I published the Guardian piece, you know, when people put comments under the line, and this is my first experience of this really, because although I've done, you know, pieces before, nothing had really garnered this level of attention. And what was really interesting and quite amusing was that there was quite a lot of comments, and they were honestly almost exactly 50-50 split between these numpty academics telling us what we already know, it's so bleeding obvious, and bears and woods and all that kind of stuff was mentioned a lot. Literally half of them said that. And literally the other half said, it's absolutely not true. I know a stockbroker that's homeless and sleeping under a bridge near me. So half of them said, this is so obvious, nobody needs to make the point. The other half said, they're completely wrong, therefore proving my point that the analysis needed to be done. When we looked at it a bit more closely, and we did actually do some analysis of the Twitter kind of arguments that were going on and some of the media reaction, and we found that the people that were pro and against our argument did actually, this is not, I say analysis, it wasn't academic research, it was us kind of just reviewing things out of interest. What we found is that the frontline workers who responded on Twitter or elsewhere tended to be very pro the argument, and often they said things like, well, thank God somebody's put the record straight, this is what I see all day every day in my work. But the public, the general public, the non-expert general public, and also campaigners, lobbyists, and some academics were very divided. They weren't very comfortable with this argument. They preferred the we're all 2 paychecks a week, it happened to any of us position. The charity fundraisers and Conservative politicians were very against it. They were very firmly fixed to this could happen to any of us, we're all in this together argument. So there seemed to be something going on there which was a bit more systematic. And we wondered whether it might reflect kind of quite deep-seated anxieties that people have about the reasons for doing something about homelessness. The whole 2 paychecks argument is obviously you should care about homelessness because it could happen to you. So it's about enlightened self-interest. Whereas our argument relies much more on social justice. It probably won't happen to you, but you should care about it anyway, which is a bit of a harder sell. My very last comment I would make, sorry this probably isn't very readable up there, is interestingly when I wrote the Guardian piece, the one punch that I pulled was to say, hey, I understand why some charities might want to use this 2 paychecks line, even if it's not true. And even if you know it's not true, you might still want to use it because it helps you with fundraising. And I can understand why you need to make a connection with the public. I'm agnostic on whether it's a good fundraising line or not. It's not my job to tell you whether it is or not. I don't know anything about fundraising for charities. But since we published that, Crisis have funded some very interesting work by the Frameworks Foundation in the US, which has looked at how advocacy organisations, including homelessness organisations, make a connection with the public and how they help shape debates and so on. And what they found, if you can read the last part of this paragraph there that's on the slide, and this was based on quite a very sort of big, rigorous study, was that they make the point about campaigners use this strategy on we're all 3 paychecks away to this appeal to the universal risk of homelessness. They found failed to shift public attitudes or beliefs, and failed to broaden people's understanding of the types of homelessness or the economic causes of homelessness. So as far as they're concerned, it doesn't work even for charity fundraising either. So if I was to write the Guardian piece again, I would also be provocative on that point. So anyway, just to finish, the links, as I said, the paper, the one at the bottom is the academic journal article that this is all included in. It is an open access paper. We paid for it to be open access, so it's not just academics. Anybody at all can click on the link and download the paper. And also the reference above is to the crisis frameworks research, because I did think people might find that of interest as well. Yeah, let's do that.
In your two vignettes, you specified the race of each hypothetical person, and is that because that was part of the study as well? And if so, what kind of impact did that have on the life audiences?
Yes, you're right. I mean, the vignettes, all of the characteristics are there for a reason. They're there because it increased or decreased your risks of homelessness. And people from black or mixed ethnicity or all mixed ethnicities have a higher risk of homelessness in the UK. People from Chinese, Asian and white ethnicities have a relatively lower risk. I mean, the great majority of people who are homeless in the UK are white, but you have a heightened risk if you're of mixed or black ethnicity. But it's important, I think, to make the point, it's not all ethnic minorities that are at heightened risk of homelessness, it's only certain ethnic minorities. So yes, that does come out in the data. And it's actually, the thing about black or mixed ethnicity is really interesting, because I think we probably all know in the United States, black Americans are hugely disproportionate risk of homelessness. I think it's about 40% of homeless people in the States are black, as compared with, I think it's only 12 or 13% of the population as a whole. So they have this hugely disproportionate risk. But our black population is much smaller than that in the UK, but the level of disproportion in the risk is about the same. You know, so we've got a black population, I think, of about 3%, and I can't remember, it's 7% or so of homeless people in the UK. So actually the level of heightened risk is of a similar kind of scale, although the absolute numbers are much lower. But mixed and black ethnicities are at heightened risk.
Hello. What definitions did you use for poverty and child poverty?
Well, I mean, the definitions of poverty, homelessness, and all the other variables that we used were dependent, obviously, on what was in the data sets. So you know, that's all kind of specified in the paper. In terms of the really core one, which is the child poverty at age 10. In the British cohort study, which is the kind of fundamental, the most powerful of the findings, that was a composite of whether you lived in a workless household at age 10, whether you what your family income level was at age 10. It was the age 16. It was whether you had reported that there was ever not enough to eat at home, as well as the labour market status of your families. So in other words, all of the variables, the key ones like poverty and homelessness and others, tended to be composite variables using the best of the evidence there was in that data set. So the particular measure of poverty is different in each of the 3 data sets, because it depends what data's available. But it's not it's a measure of poverty and also material deprivation combined in most cases. But it does, you know, it's very dependent on the data sources. Was it just poverty, or was it other definitions?
Poverty and child poverty. Yeah. I mean, what seems to be the obvious question for me now is why?
Why child poverty drives it? I mean, that's obviously not a question that this particular paper sets out to answer. I mean, it's not one of the research questions, and it's not something you can get from quantitative analysis. But there's lots and lots of other research that helps answer that question. And I would summarise what that other research shows you by saying, because I mean, the child poverty finding didn't come at all as a surprise to us. It's what we expected to find. What came as a surprise to us was the strength of the relationship and the extent to which it was kind of unambiguous, because usually in statistical analysis the patterns don't come out quite as clearly as they did in this. But the reasons, I would say, is because the impact that poverty has on your resources, not just your financial resources, but also your social resources, are really profound. So if you're brought up in a family struggling with poverty, not only does that mean materially you're not protected from all of the things that make life difficult and the transitions you have to make into early adulthood, so you don't have the protection of universities, you don't have the protection of families that can help you with deposits for flats and all the rest of it. All that stuff's important, but is the obvious end of the spectrum. The other issues are also important. I've talked about the families and social relationships being buffers to homelessness, that's also undermined by poverty. So if you're brought up in a poor household, you're much more likely to have a mother who's got a mental health problem, you're much more likely to experience other forms of family stress and breakdown and conflict and all of those things. So you go into early adulthood with neither the material buffers nor the social buffers that other young people have. So it's that homelessness research, but research about poverty and the impacts of poverty more generally.
I'm from Wales, and in Wales we've done a lot with, I feel really loud this year, around adverse childhood experiences, which is what we talk about. And I think the Welsh Government are they seem to be quite on board with introducing, working to address ACEs and mitigate ACEs in Wales. How have, I know it's early days because this has only just been published, but what do you think will happen? Will the UK government, do you think, respond to this effectively and take this on board?
Well, I doubt very much they'll respond to it effectively, given the nature of the current UK government. But what I did make the point halfway through, partly because I was quite amazed that in the rough sleeping strategy that they just published, they did reference this. I think probably some researchers sneaked it in without the policy people really being complete. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, you're screaming it. Anyway, I was surprised it was in there because it is this is structural and this is policy driven and you should do something about it. So at least in that public document, like Scotland, like in Wales, there is a lot of emphasis on ACEs at the moment, and there's a very wide agenda here as well. And in fact, the Scottish Government is, I think, genuinely really committed to doing something about it, which I think sounds to be similar in Wales as well. My understanding is the whole ACEs agenda has not taken off in England to anything like the same extent as yet. And of course the whole ACEs agenda isn't just about homelessness, it's about all sorts of very bad outcomes in early adulthood. I'm hopeful that there's been a lot of important reversals on welfare reform recently. The UK people in the room will know that. Lots of things that would have made the situation even worse have been reversed. So I'm hopeful, if you like, of a softening, and there has been some evidence already of a softening of some of the worst aspects of current policy. Whether they will take forward a really serious agenda on child poverty, I doubt it. I think we need a change in government for that in England. But I do think in Scotland and in Wales there are some really interesting things going on. And I think the whole ACEs agenda is something that Glenn, colleague in particular, is doing quite a lot of work on. He's doing actually an analysis of a whole other set of data sets looking at the relationship between ACEs specifically and homelessness and other poor outcomes. So this analysis, we weren't able to do that because apart from the British cohort study, we didn't have material on people's childhoods. But there are, growing up in Scotland, a really good Scottish data set, and I think there are equivalents in other parts of the UK that allow you to look at the ACEs issue in much more detail and link it to homelessness and other outcomes. So that's an ongoing piece of work for us just now.
What benefit?
Yeah. Adverse childhood experiences. So some of the things that I mentioned in the presentation. So not just there's a debate, actually, a very live debate about whether poverty is an ACE or not. But other issues like experiencing child abuse, neglect as a child, having parents with substance misuse or mental health problems, and other forms of trauma. It's basically childhood trauma. And there's a very live debate about whether poverty is in and of itself a source or a form of trauma or something that interacts with traumas. But there's a lot of interest, not just in the homelessness world, but in social policy more generally in Scotland and in Wales, in how we reduce the experience of childhood trauma, but also how we try to prevent the very bad outcomes in early adulthood that are often associated with childhood trauma. So it's a big social policy agenda at the moment for us.
Any more questions? No? Okay. I think if we can all just give Suzanne a round of applause. Thank you very much.